First on BBC One.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the History CV of Britain. I'm your host Paul, and in a few moments time I'll be joined by Dr Stephen Pidgeon, who's going to be answering my questions on early Christianity in Britain. Really excited about that. First, a few things to mention. This book, I finished it finally. It's absolutely fantastic. I'll be speaking to the author in a few days' time, hopefully, about this book and about the follow-up, which I'll show you in a moment. But I'm just been incredibly lucky to have found this book at just the right time. It really is a seminal work in the genre. So if you haven't read this yet, please try and find a copy. Right, so that's that one. On Tuesday this week, I'll be interviewing John Neal about ancient metrology. John Neal, of course, is the author of Opus 2, All Done with Mirrors, which is really the modern day Bible on ancient astrology. So I can't wait to meet up with him on Tuesday. Hugh Evans will also be in attendance for that as well. And I'll be interviewing John in his favourite pub in London. So that should be a lot of fun. And then after that, I'm turning on to this book, The Blood of Avalon, which is the follow-up to The Holy Kingdom by Adrian Gilbert. Very much looking forward to that. Right, okay. Now, I was going to show you the final part of Millie Jackdaw's Merlin and the Pig. I'm going to postpone it for a week for two reasons. One is that I don't want to keep my guest waiting too long today. And next week, I'll be flying solo. So I'll be doing the stream on my own next week, which should be fun. So that will probably be on a summary of everything I've learned so far on early Christianity in Britain. Now, it will probably be a half an hour show, so slightly shorter than usual, because Marchelle Abrahams is making her debut on the Amish Inquisition podcast. That starts at 8 p.m. and she'll be discussing this book. I hope I remember to reverse the image. The Great Migrations to Britain of 1527 BC, that's Princess Albine, and 485 BC, that's Brutus, of course. So just looking at this, I can't wait to read it again. I've got so many books to read, but this is one of my all-time favourite books. So don't forget, next week, please join Marchelle on the Amish Inquisition at 8 p.m. Okay, right. I think that's it. Before I introduce our guest, I'm just going to briefly show you his website, which is cepher.net, which is CEPHER. It's a really fantastic website full of videos, blogs, information on all sorts of interesting subjects. And I recently watched, there it is there, the protocols of the Arimathean remnant, which focuses on Joseph of Arimathea. And I highly recommend you watch that. It's you can watch it here on the website, or you can watch it on Dr Stephen Pidgeon's YouTube channel. So there we go. There's something to check out. It's a fantastic website full of really cool information. Right, okay, so let's stop sharing now. There we go, back on. Okay, so Dr. Pidgeon, today's guest, is a biblical scholar, an author, a political scientist, and multi-instrumentalist. His website, sefer.net, is a brilliant source of information and analysis on the Bible, theology, and many other fascinating subjects. And his YouTube channel, named Stephen Pidgeon, has over 100 videos on similar topics. So please check that out as well. The links are below the video. So without further ado, I will bring on Dr. Stephen Pidgeon. Welcome, sir.
Hi, Paul. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great. Been really looking forward to this. I've been, as I said, I've been watching your videos and reading some of your blogs on sefer.net. And yeah, some fantastic stuff on there. So could we start today, sir, by you giving a brief bio of yourself?
Well, I think with that bio you just laid out is pretty good, Paul. You kind of put it in place. I was kind of called to what I'm doing right now. Well, actually, pretty early. I started reading, shall we say, some of the extra books of the Bible in the 1990s. And this led to a greater exploration, and the greater exploration led to ultimately becoming a student of Scripture. And now I have been involved in Scripture really full time for the last almost 15 years now. And
Wow.
So as a consequence, I've learned a lot more than what I thought than I expected to learn, right? And but during this journey, I mean, I was working as a practicing lawyer in the United States for 25 years. And that was a very good preparation, very good foundation for me. Because to really fully understand what's going on in Scripture, you really need to have the mind of a lawyer. But really, they spring from the same source, if you will. The lawyers, and it has its roots in ancient Britain, which I'm very excited to talk to you about today.
Yeah.
But at any rate, all of these things just kind of culminated with me moving forward and ultimately I left my law practice to be able to do Scripture full time and nothing but Scripture. And so that's what I'm engaged in right now. And teaching, I teach on Sefer Academy, and we teach things like, for instance, we've finished up almost maybe, 6 months of Blackstone's common law of England.
Mm-hmm.
I've been teaching on that class. We've been teaching a robust class on the Book of Revelation called the Chazon, going through it verse by verse, line by line, and all its references. I taught an initial introduction to Hebrew class, and I'm currently teaching a Hebrew class called Rightly Dividing the Word, in order to understand how you divide the ancient Hebrew to be able to see what's written there. Enormous. The implications are just enormous. Some of the things we found, they're just huge. And of course, I've also taught on geoglyphs, on geography, on the history of the United States. We've taught, we've had many, many classes that have happened through Sefer Academy, in addition to the discussion on Sefer Moments. But I have to say, Paul, when you talk about this, well, I'm going to let you ask the questions. I think that's going to be the best way for me to, inform what's going on.
Okay, that's absolutely fascinating. So I've seen you on Britain's Hidden History channel a few times, and you travelled to Britain and saw many of the ancient sites in South Wales that are connected to early Christianity in Britain. But when did you first come across the fact that the Christian church originated in Britain and not in Rome?
Well, that would be with my travels with Ross Broadstock, formerly of Britain's Hidden History. And Ross turned out to be a very good friend. And of course, my friend Shane Stokes. And it was funny because I had kind of stumbled on the history. Well, how do you put it? I was studying the migration of the tribes, and I was coming on information that indicated there were things going on in Britain that were very significant. And I guess it was in maybe 2019, maybe 2018, 2019. Shane Stokes wrote me and said, well, why don't you come over here and see? And I said, well, I wasn't planning on coming to Britain, but I guess I will. So I flew in and caught a train out to Cardiff and then we went up to Merthyr Tydfil, and we stayed up there. And then Ross came and met us, and Ross came and showed us some of the preliminary things. And one of the places we went to was the Church of St. Illid, and this was, in Ross's opinion, an indication of a church that had been founded there in as early as 36 AD. And so this became extremely important. Now, this kind of started the research. And since then, I have made many trips into Britain, and particularly in doing a megalithic study.
Okay.
And the megaliths, of course, in Ireland are extremely persuasive. And also the megaliths in Cornwall are equally persuasive. And then last March, I had the opportunity to be both in Cardiff, Merthyr Tydfil, up at Caernarfon, and then up to Menai on the island of Anglesey.
Yeah.
And the discovery in Anglesey was really incredible. I'll just put it to that way. It was incredible. And so the, unlike Henry Gruver, who went up to the Eagle Tower at Caernarfon and had a vision, I went up to the Eagle Tower and saw the other side of the Straits of Menai. I mean, that was it. There's Anglesey. Great. That's the extent of my vision. All right, let's go. And but one thing we did find in going between Caerdydd, Cardiff, and going up to Caernarfon was we came upon a stone circle, and it was a perfectly preserved stone circle. In other words, this one was really. I've been at some of the other stone circles in Wales. Some of them kind of beaten up, a little tired. People have removed stones and so on. This one was in absolutely pristine condition. It had both the rocking stone and the Logan stone and the 12 stones in position, 12 unhewn stones in position. And it was a very clear indication. Now, also in Menai, up on Anglesey, we also had the opportunity to go to a megalith there, an ancient megalith, that was predictive, of course, of the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox. And again, in a stone circle foundation. All of these things are critically important to understanding what was going on in the faith. So that's where it started with Ross.
Okay. Well, I'll be asking you about your experiences in Britain and meeting up with Ross Broadstock at the end of our discussion today. I'd like to focus to start with, if possible, on the early Christian church. Can I ask you, how different was the original Church of Jesus and James compared with the Christian church that we know today?
Oh, radically different. Yeah, when you look at the original foundation of the church, and of course, there's really three different camps in the church. You have Peter's version of the church, which is described in the book of Acts, chapter 2, chapter 3. Then you have James the Just, his version of the church, which is described in the writings at Qumran. And you can kind of see it in the community rules, because Yaqub Sadiq is what his name was. And he created a monastic order at Qumran. And the community rules reflect that. So one has to understand that this is going to be different than the church that's birthed in Britain. The church that's birthed in Britain, in my opinion, is the more holistic, more well-rounded, complete church. And there's a whole bunch. And if you don't mind my answering this question, Paul, I mean, I need to set some background. Okay. There's a very important story that takes place in Ireland, which is the arrival of Jeremiah and his scribe, Baruch, who the Irish describe as Brug. And they arrive with Tamar, the daughter of Zedekiah, the last king of Jerusalem. And in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 10, Jeremiah is given the authority as a prophet to tear down nations and to end them and to reestablish them. And so there was a reestablishment of Jerusalem in Ireland. And this is an extremely important point because we're going to see that the faith is going to birth in Britain because of that fact. Remember that I teach the common law, right? So here's what we see is that you see that in Ireland at the time, the Isle was pretty much dominated by a group called the Tuatha Dé Danann, which was really the ancient tribe of Dan. And they were serpent worshipers. They were a serpent worshiping cult. And they had pretty much the control of the island, although the Belgians, or the Bulgars, what they were called Furbolgs, also had a presence on the island. But Yochai the Harriman, who would take the throne in 581 BC, he came up from Spain as part of the house of Sirach to take the throne, and he would marry Tia Tefi, who was of the house of Peretz, the two twins of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
And he would marry her, and they would reform a city called Tara, named after the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremiah and Baruch would bring the Torah into Ireland. Now, this changed everything. And so in its changing of everything, now you see a foundation of the common law, which is predicated on the 10 commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So the 10 commandments are what you would call in the Hebrew the Eben Rosh Pina, the chief cornerstone. Now, the chief cornerstone is later going to be made flesh in Mashiach, but initially we see the chief cornerstone is this 10 commandments. And from this, all the common law springs, and every king and every member of parliament and every judge who's ever sat in any authority in Britain is subject to that common law.
Mm-hmm.
They may try to pretend they're not, but they are. And so this is this foundation that is built from 581 BC, very convincing record at the tomb of Jeremiah in Ireland. But this is from 581 BC, this comes forward. Now, when Joseph Arimathea, and this is something very important to see. It's not of Arimathea.
Mm-hmm.
The of is added. Arimathea was a title. So when you see him in the Roman title, his name is Curius Nobilis de Curiae. And he had a similar name in the Greek that's expressed in the New Testament. The of is inferred in the dialogue. Joseph of Arimathea, they were thinking that is a geographic spot, but it is not.
Mm-hmm.
Arimathea means first in the divine line of kings.
Wow.
So his name alone is telling you that he was an exilarch king in the line of David. And he was the last exilarch king in the line of David. Now compare this to Yaakov Sadiq, who was the half-brother of Mashiach. Compare this with Kepha, who was called Talmudim. Here you have Yosef Arimathea, the divine line of kings. So when he is persecuted in the Middle East, in the Levant, he's persecuted in the Levant. And for 5 years in a row, he's beaten, and he has to leave. When he leaves in 36 AD, he leaves on ships that are well established on trade routes that he ran, and he comes to the British Isles. And there's reason to believe, and I don't want to get ahead of us, but you said that you wanted to ask me about Abiragas.
Mm-hmm.
And and so the Domesday book, which is the writings of William the Conqueror in 1086 AD, this book details the delivered by Abiragas, which means father king.
Mm-hmm.
Abiragas was delivered 12 hides of land to Joseph Arimathea and his Talmudim, or his disciples, the people that were with him. Okay. Now those 12, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so Arimathea has never existed, as far as anyone knows. I don't know if you've come across the work and research of a chap called Edmund Marriage. I found his work recently, and he said, quite similar to you, that Arimathea wasn't the correct title. It was actually Ha-Rama-Theo, which he says meant exalted of the gods.
Yeah, that's one way. That's a way to put it. Yeah. But when you see the Thea, right, the Thea from Theos, the Greek Theos, Rama lifted up, exalted, right? Rama Thea, of the exalted, God. But when you're talking about that exaltation, how is he exalted? He's exalted in the line of kings. And so this is something most people miss it, because when they start to read their New Testament, they get into Matthew 1, and Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat, Jacob and Jan. And if I read one more begat, I'm going to pass out, right? But those begats are really so critically important, because they lay the foundation of the first 14 generations coming to David. Then you have 14 generations of kings. Then you have 14 generations of exilarch kings, who can no longer sit on the throne because of the curse that came upon Judea. And so, and the last of that line of exilarch kings is Joseph Arimathea. So this is where, in the Sefer, we have corrected the text to read Joseph, the father of Miriam, and which means Miriam is a direct descendant. And of course, the Gospel of Yaakov, which is not included in most New Testaments, does discuss this business of, this rich man and his wife who had a daughter named Miriam, put her in the temple, and so on and so forth. So when you see this, this relationship of Joseph of Arimathea to Miriam makes him the grandfather of the Messiah, not the uncle.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's answered my next question. So he was in fact the grandfather of Jesus.
Okay. He was the grandfather.
Because I've heard before that he was the uncle. I've heard that he was possibly mixed up with James the Just. Some people say he was the brother of Jesus or the uncle, but you say he's the grandfather.
The narrative that he's the uncle was made up in the 3rd century by a rabbi. Okay, but when you look closely at the narrative between Matthew 1 and Luke 3, Luke 3 gives the genealogy of Joseph, the supposed father. Mm-hmm. And it's a completely different genealogy than Matthew 1. It's a totally different genealogy. Mm-hmm. Joseph is the son of, he's in the line of David through Nathan, the son of David, whereas Joseph Arimathea in Matthew 1 is of David through Solomon in the line of kings. It's two different genealogies. So are they lying? No, there's an error. And the error is in trying to say that Joseph was the husband of Mary in Matthew 1. Wow. It was the father. And so the idea that he was it's because it's very clear people want to try to say, okay, they want to link to him somehow because he was able to get the body off the cross. Mm-hmm. Under Roman law, you can't just walk in and say, hey, I'm a rich guy, give me the body of the guy who got killed. Right? It doesn't happen. Right? Mm-hmm. You had to be the paternal leader of the clan to be able to get that body. And so he was the grandfather. Now, this is going to lead us into the history in Britain, because I had the opportunity last March when I was in Wales as well. I was also in Cornwall. And we spent a lot of time going to all the various sites and looking at the folklore in Cornwall. And, again, when you're talking 2,000 years ago, you have folklore. That's what you have. Mm-hmm. Unless you try to rely on Gildas or, where's your record, right? We got Gildas, we got the Domesday record. These are the earliest writings. So when you go back and you look at what the folklore is, we know that the Ding Dong mine in Cornwall has been around since about 1500 BC.
Yep.
We also know Arimathea was running the tin mines, and he was running all the traffic of the tin mines, both in Cornwall and in Wales. He had 70 ships under his control. But one thing that most people do not know is that there was a different geography at that time. And this is where we had such a great meeting up in Anglesey. We went to this museum, and I had a chance to discuss things with Ian Jones up there. And very well-versed historian and curator of the museum. And we started talking about Doggerland.
Oh, right. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So, so Doggerland is now an accepted fact that the North Sea was at one time dry and an agricultural area. Well, it's under 200 feet of water right now. Mm-hmm. If you pull 200 feet of water down from the British Isles, you'll see that Ireland is connected to Scotland. And England is connected to France. The Straits of Dover are only 85 feet deep.
So do you place the disappearance of Doggerland with the Great Flood?
No. I placed the disappearance of Doggerland. I think the disappearance of Doggerland happened probably around the 4th century AD.
Oh, that recent. Okay.
Yes, because you had something very significant because, North America up until that time was almost, Canada was almost completely covered with ice. Mm-hmm. So the ice was swarmed all the way down into the northern parts of the United States. Massive ice sheet. Mm-hmm. And this massive ice sheet was also over the top of Greenland, Iceland, and even Norway, Sweden, Finland, that area. But there was a huge global warming thing that happened in the 3rd century. around 250 AD. And this was 11 degrees centigrade. There's a great
Wow.
English author. It's Lloyd Monckton. And Lloyd Monckton wrote in detail about this, brilliantly peer-reviewed articles concerning this period of global warming.
That's
And,
Christopher Monckton?
yeah.
Yeah, I know the guy, yeah.
Yeah. And he's a brilliant guy. And anyway, when he wrote all this information, what happened was that global warming caused a migration out of the equatorial areas of the world because they were way too hot. And so what had taken place was there was a discovery that Europe all of a sudden was livable because all the ice had melted. And hey, there's rivers we can build on, and we can live on these rivers. We can build ports, and this is where Norway and Sweden were able to be, really kind of fully populated because guess what? It wasn't a Nordic environment. So they have found grapevines in northern Scotland, grapevines even in Iceland. So you can see that there was a significant climate shift. Well, with that climate shift, with the melting of the ice, so the seas also rose. And so I think that Doggerland disappeared as I think Doggerland was with us as early as the 2nd century AD.
Wow. Okay.
And so this means that there was no traveling by ship around the northern coast of France through Belgium and Holland because they were connected directly to Britain.
Wow. That's incredible. I've not heard that idea before. I'll definitely be looking into that. I think if you just bear with me, Stephen, I'm just going to put 1 or 2 comments up on the screen. We've had quite a lot already. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for putting in your comments. And please, if you've got any questions for Dr. Pidgeon, please put them in the chat box. Okay, we're having conversations about law and all sorts here. And there's a question here. Does Dr. Pidgeon see Druidism also as an expression of Christianity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And Druidism, when you talk about Druidism, Druidism is something that is completely misunderstood in the modern epic because of the practice of Druidism now in the modern epic. The Druids were not wont to write anything down. They didn't believe in writing. They believed in memorization because the idea was that if you wrote it down, you killed it. But the Druids, when you talk about the Brehon system that was built, that we call Druids, the Brehon system was built upon the common law. So the common law has 3 features, right? It springs from time out of mind. It's manifestly reasonable, and it was the subject of consent. If you go back and look at the 10 Commandments, the house of Yasharel, standing at Mount Horeb, all these things that you have told us to do, we will do. That's consent. And so these 10 commands came down, the foundation, the cornerstone of the common law from which all the common law springs. And the Brehons were practicing this. So when you look at a stone circle, the stone circles, and the one in Wales that we saw was a very good example. When you look at the stone circle, you see 12 stones, unhewn stones, right? They stack the stones. They're not carved stones. They're unhewn. And then you have 2 stones. You have one Logan stone and you have a rocking stone. Well, the rocking stone was used by the Brehon to adjudicate the case. So when he was standing on the stone, when you're making your argument to the judge, he's leaning back on the stone and he's listening. Then when he goes to give his decision, he steps forward on the stone rocks forward, and he's leaning forward, telling you his decision. And then after you get the decision of the judge, you would put your offering over there on the Logan stone, right? And then these stone circles, when you look at them very carefully, you can see it's possible to tell the hour of the day. It's possible to tell the month of the year and your relationship to the equinox. You can tell that by the size of the shadows, by whether the shadows are inside the circle, outside the circle, above the circle, at an angle on the circle. All of those things tell you what time it is during the day. When you get to know the shadows, you can tell what time it is, what month of the year it is, etc. All these things from these stone circles. So the Brehon system and the Druid system was a system that was, the triadic formula, right? And so when you talk about expressing the truth in triads, this was their methodology to express the truth in triads. And this expression of triads was something that they also had a name for the Heavenly Father, which we call Yahweh. they called Yao, 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 and very close to Yahoo, but in this case, Yao. And so remember that the tale of the Magi, and this is where you get, again, bad translation in the English. They say the Magi came from the East. No, that's not what it says at all. When coming from the East is an inference because it says they're coming at the rising of the sun. It wasn't that they came from the East because the sun rises in the East, therefore they must have been coming from the East. No, they came at sunrise. They came at dawn. Now, it's my opinion that the Magi were actually Druids. They were the ones that were the studiers of astronomy. They were the ones that knew. In fact, it's reason that and of course, and I'll just share this with you too, Paul. There's a megalithic place in Ireland up at the what's the name of the river? The Boyne River, and this is called New Grange. And New Grange, there's 3 mounts there: New Grange, Knowth, and Dowth. And New Grange is very significant because it has 52 megalithic stones at its base. And then it has this cavern that illuminates on the winter solstice.
Yeah.
So this predicts a 52-week year and an additional day. So it predicts the 365-day calendar. You can see that by the size of the stones at the base. And if you go to Knowth, Knowth is incredible in its petroglyphs, right? It's petroglyphs that are scratched on the stones. One of them predicts and lays out the 7-day week. It gives you very clearly. So here you have a petroglyph on Knowth saying, here's the 7-day week. And then you have these stones stacked at the base of New Grange that are 52 10-foot by 6-foot wide by 6-foot tall stones, right? These are, intentional delivery of the fact that there was a 7-day week practiced 4,500 years ago and a 365-day calendar reckoned on the winter solstice. I mean, there it is. And Knowth also has both the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox calculated on that mound. So there's others too. There's other things like, for instance, there's a glyph at Knowth that shows the sun and 10 planets. And not only does it show 10 planets, but it shows their respective size.
Wow.
In this glyph. Now, when we say 10 planets, there is a 10th planet. There was a planet between Mars and Jupiter called Rahav in the scripture. The scripture talks about the destruction of Rahav.
Is this Nibiru?
No, this is not Nibiru. This is what is now an asteroid belt.
Right.
Now, I noticed, by the way, I got to compliment you, Paul. Your opening video, I think, is just terrific. I think it's just terrific.
Thank you.
It's got a real, I guess you call it a Qumran groove, but it's definitely got the groove, right? And but when you look at Stonehenge, right? Hidden Knowledge. I forget the author's name, but this was a book that Ross wanted me to read, and I did read the book. I read all 4 of them actually. He did the research on Stonehenge. Stonehenge does not predict the winter equinox or the solstice or human sacrifice or anything else. It predicts the orbits of the 10 planets to within 3 decimal points of their average orbits in a single algorithm.
Wow.
That's what he proves in Hidden Knowledge, in a single algorithm. And so the fact that Knowth has this knowledge of the 10 planets, the fact that Stonehenge is going to give you the orbit of these planets in its algorithm, gives you an indication of the kind of geometry and astronomy that was known in the ancient days in the British Isles. And so when you talk about the Druids community, so here's the difference. When you see, so one of the things we saw in Cornwall is that it appears, and I think it's persuasive, that Joseph of Arimathea was there. He was running the tin mines there. And as a consequence, they were in and out. And he brought Mashiach there. Now, I think it's mythology. I think Glastonbury is mythology. I'll just tell you that straight out. You've been to Glastonbury, I assume.
Yeah, a couple of times, yeah.
Okay, you've been up on the Tor.
Yeah, loved it, yeah.
Okay, so the Tor is the ancient tower. That's the oldest site at Glastonbury. That was built 930 AD.
That
So
reason, really?
reason, oh yeah,
Wow.
the Tor and the Abbey. The Abbey was after that. The Abbey was Knights Templar. So all of that mythology about Arthur being buried there. Oh, by the way, yeah, no, Arthur was not Arthur II was not buried there. I went to the church with Ross Broadstock, St. Peter's Church in
Yeah.
Wales, that Alan Wilson had bought, and where they found the grave. That when they dug up the grave, there was a 6-foot skeleton holding a cross on his chest that said Arthur. Now I don't know, because with Ross's premature death, which I'm heartbroken about. I was singing and did these feet in ancient time, walk on Britain's mountains green, with him 2 weeks before.
Mm.
And but at any rate, Ross knew the location of the cross, but Alan Wilson's now gone, and Barham Blackett is now gone.
Yeah.
So who knows, right?
A lot to take in there, and lots of questions already brewing in my head about all that. I've often wondered how important astrology was to the Jewish religion around the time of Jesus Christ. How important do you think it was to the Jews then?
It's extremely important, and
It's not really discussed, is it? It's not really talked about very much.
No, in fact, most of the churches say, nope, you can't do that.
Mm.
But this would be an incorrect perception, because unless you open your eyes to it, you won't see it.
Mm.
But in the book of Revelation, okay, I'll just give you an example of how critical this was. You have the chapter 1 in Revelation. You have Mashiach standing among 7 menorahs with 7 stars in his right hand. And he says, these 7 stars are the angels of the 7 congregations, and these 7 menorahs are the 7 congregations. Okay, well, why didn't they give us Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria? Why didn't they give us those congregations? They don't give us those. They give us Ephesus, Philadelphia, Smyrna, Sardis, Laodicea, Pergamum, right? Why'd they give us those? Well, when you imprint those sites, which you can, because they're all known in Turkey, when you imprint those sites on a piece of paper, you will see that they lay out the geography of the Pleiades almost exactly.
Wow. That's something best to you, Evans. Carry on, please.
And that also is something that is quite interesting, because we didn't know of the 7th star in Pleiades until the 20th century, with the development of a telescope called Subaru.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they found it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they knew of it in those days. And so that's one thing. Now, when you look at Revelation 12, there appeared a great wonder in heaven. A woman, right, clothed with the sun, with the moon at her feet, and 12 stars in her hair, giving birth to a male child. That is clear cosmology. That is a clear statement of a sign of the constellations in heaven. And in particular, it's dealing with the constellation Virgo, which we saw that sign manifest in 2017, September 23rd, 2017. For the first time, where you saw Jupiter exiting the womb of the Virgo. Now, this is not the only place that you see this. When they talk about in Revelation 13, there appeared a dragon who had 10 heads and 7 horns, or 10 crowns and 7 horns, 10 kings and 7 heads. That's what it was. When you look at that, that is describing the constellation Draco. It's describing Draco in the heavens. So Revelation is absolutely packed with discussion of the Mazzaroth. Bullinger, E.W. Bullinger, who wrote the Companion Bible in the 1800s, also wrote a book, A Witness to the Stars, where he discusses the Mazzaroth in detail. When you understand in Hebrew, the planets were called, and by the way, the name planet comes from a passage in Jude, where Jude is referring to wandering stars. And in the Greek, that's planetae astra. That's where they get the name planets, because what's the difference when you look at the planets in the sky compared to a constellation like Orion, or you're looking at Polaris, or you're looking at Ursa Major, whatever you're looking at? The difference is those constellations don't move. They move in proximity to the sky, but they don't move in and of themselves. Planets, on the other hand, are wandering all over the place. So Venus is over here, Jupiter's there, Mars there. Look, it's going in retrograde. They're called wandering stars, right? Planetary astra. Okay. So these things, and the planets, the 7 planets identified in the Hebrew, Chama was Mercury, Shachar was Venus, Eretz was Earth, Madom from the red is Mars. The next planet, the 5th planet, Rachav, which is now an asteroid belt. Then the 6th planet, Jupiter, was called Tzaddik, and the 7th planet, Saturn, called Shabbat. Okay, so these are the 7 planets identified in the Hebrew world. So yeah, the cosmology. So the cosmology is going to be extremely important. When you go back into ancient history and you look, I was talking to you about Jeremiah's tomb. Jeremiah's tomb has a fascinating hieroglyph inside on the wall. You can't go in there now, but you can stick your phone in there and take a picture of it. And that hieroglyph has been recently interpreted. I think 2014, a fellow interpreted it by doing what? Applying its cosmology, because it depicts a solstice and a certain set of constellations in the sky in a certain order. And because of that, they were able to date that megalith to 581 BC. Now, Graham Hancock has done a ton of work on megaliths all over the world. And by looking at the cosmology, they can date the specific megalith to a particular time. Mm-hmm. So it's really quite fascinating. So yes, so the cosmology was very important to the Druids. And this would come forward into, because, and the point I want to make about this, I'm going to answer your question. When Arimathea showed up in 36 AD with the testimony of Mashiach, that he had been crucified and that all of this had happened in Judea, unlike the people in Judea who rejected that message, the Druids accepted that message. Mm-hmm. And they said, we knew this was going to happen because all of our prophecies predicted this. Everything we looked to, we knew this was going to take place. And so this story rings 100% true to us. Mm-hmm. And so as a consequence, you see this real evolution of a New Testament attaching to the Old Testament in really the reshaped New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem being formed in Tara in Ireland, and the Brehon system bringing forward the system of what? Judges. You see, unlike in the Middle East, when you saw the kingdom of David rise and all this, they had abandoned the system of judges. Give us a king. 1 Samuel chapter 8. Give us a king. We don't want to do your judge thing anymore. Samuel says, hey, you guys are rejecting me. And Yah says to him, they haven't rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me. I'm going to give them a king and I'm not going to come back. Okay, but the Brehon system and the Druids, they did not do that. There was a king, but the king was subject to the common law. The king was subject to the Ibn Rosh Pina. He could not hold the throne unless he met the criteria of the common law. And this system would spread over all of Europe. And this is why the Druids were, Druid, right, in French means planted oak, right? Planted oak. Now go back and read Isaiah 61, right? Isaiah 62, the passage that Mashiach would quote in the synagogue, right?
Yeah.
I will plant the planting of oaks of righteousness. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
have you? I know you've read the passage in the book of Isaiah that says that the next prophet's religion will be will start in the land of Lud, and I take that as meaning King Lud, who was a king in Britain at the time of Christ, which is an incredible coincidence, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there is. Now, when you're talking about Lud, right?
Yeah, L-U-D, yeah.
Lud. Yeah, Lud, who would become spelled L-E-O-D, Leod. That in Scotland would be known as MacLeod, right? And yeah, and so the sons of Lud. Well, the tribe of Lud is a Semitic tribe, and so this is how I got caught up in doing my research in Britain, because it had to do with the migration of the tribes. Now, a lot of people want to talk about Brutus, right? Brutus coming to Britain. Well, Brutus is no, this is a bad spelling. This is a Latinized spelling. BRTS is not really BRTS, it's BRTSH. And it's not fill in the blanks with U's, it's fill in the blanks with I's. Brit-ish, the covenant man. And the covenant man is not a name, it is a title. It is a title, not a name. It's a title. And so when you see this now, there was an interesting migration pattern because the House of Lud, or Lydia, the House of Lud was actually in the Anatolian Peninsula, Semitic people group, and they had formed around a body of water that would be called the Dardanelles. We call it the Dardanelles today. And a fellow named Darda, who was the son of Zarak, very important name in British history, Zarak. The Darda would form the city of Troy, and Darda would come to rule over the city of Troy because the scepter is in the hand of Judah and the lawgiver between his feet. Okay. So he would rule over that. Then Troy would be destroyed. Well, they replanted Troy where? On the Thames. The original name of the town was New Troy.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it would become what? Ludonium after the tribe of Lud, because it was the Lydian tribe living there, the tribe of Lud, which is why you have the hill of Lud, Lud Hill, where St. Paul's Cathedral is. Right? Yeah. Lud Hill. And yeah, so all of this is extremely important. And so the tribe of Lud is going to be resident in the British Isles. And this would be a Semitic tribe. Now, when we talk about Zarak, keep in mind that when you go back to the prophecy in Genesis 49, Yaakov is looking over the 12 sons and he says to Judah, Judah, you will have the scepter in your hand and a lawgiver between your feet till Shiloh comes. Okay, so this becomes a birthright. A birthright. So who gets the birthright? The firstborn. The primogenitor gets the birthright. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then who was the firstborn of Judah? Zarak.
Right.
Because the hand came out and the red ribbon was placed around the hand and the hand withdrew. Under the Torah, he broke the matrix. He's the firstborn. A lot of people get this wrong. Oh, Peretz, he was the firstborn. No, that's not true. The hand that broke the matrix is the firstborn. Therefore, Zarak is the primogenitor, has the right to the scepter and the lawgiver between his feet. Now, Zarak would be scapegoated in Scripture. You might recall the Azazel goat had a red ribbon around his neck, sent out to the wilderness. This is what happened with Zarak. Red ribbon around the hand, sent out into the wilderness. So it's very difficult to trace the genealogy of Zarak, although there is a great scholar, Charles A.L. Totten is his name. He used to teach at Yale University in the 19th century, A.L. Totten, Totten. And he wrote extensively on the history of Zarak and its relationship to the pharaohs of Egypt, the tribal migration into Spain and Portugal, into France, into Ireland, into Scotland. Now, I want to share this with you, Paul, because you being a good Welshman. The Welsh have a different and unique tribal history. Mm-hmm. It's very unique. Ross Broadstock, along with Alan Wilson, demonstrated that you understand Egyptian hieroglyphics by comparing it to the Welsh language.
Yep.
Right? Ross wrote cumuloglyphics to demonstrate this. And Alan Wilson in his Moses in the Hieroglyphs, proves it. And so because of this, how is it that the Qumrite language has this essence to be able to explain Egyptian hieroglyphs? And the answer is, and this is, you got to study Hebrew to understand this. Okay, so there is a king listed in ancient the northern kingdom, whose name was Omri. Well, Omri is a mispronunciation. His name was not Omri, his name was Umri. Okay?
Yeah.
Omri is somebody's preference on the vowel sound. It was Umri. Okay. Now, Umri was the one who codified the law in the northern kingdom. So you wouldn't say he was a great king who ruled for 50 years, but they said he had a dynasty that preceded him by a generation and followed him by 2 generations, and he codified the law. But what was going on in the Northern Kingdom? Well, there was a tribe who had sojourned with the house of Yasharel that is not mentioned with any particularity in the book of Numbers or anywhere else. Which tribe was it? It was the tribe of Joseph. Because Joseph had other children besides Ephraim and Manasseh. He had other children in Egypt besides Ephraim and Manasseh. And these children of Yosef would congregate as the tribe of Joseph and sojourn with the house of Yasharel, although Yosef had passed his blessing on to his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, right? So when you see the count in Numbers and you see the count in the delivery of the land in Yasharel, all of this is done to Ephraim and Manasseh, not a word about Yosef. But the tribe of Yosef would be congregating in the northern kingdom. And one of the distinctions about the tribe of Yosef that was so much different than the southern tribes was that they retained the language of Egypt.
Okay.
They retained the language of Egypt. And so when the northern kingdom was dispersed, they had a group of people that this tribe of Joseph that were described by their captors in the Assyrians as being like Umri. They were like Umri.
Yep.
Well, how would you say that? Kumri.
Kumri.
That's it. The Kaf as the Kaf is the prefix meaning like Umri. Kumri. They were the Kumri. So when the tribe of Kumri comes into Wales, this is a different group. This is a different migration group. This is the house of Joseph coming into Wales and retaining that character. So I find it just absolutely fascinating because, and you also see the house of Joseph where? In Cornwall, right? Because the ancient Cornish is very much like the ancient Cymraeg, right? They're very similar languages, but distinct from Gaelic. It's a different language in Gaelic, right? And so as a consequence, you can see that this Welsh history is particularly fascinating, very, very interesting in terms of its repleteness. But why would Aramathea end up in Cardiff and not in Cornwall? Why didn't he take? First of all, we're going to get 12 hides in Cornwall, right? The land's a little narrow, you know. But I think that Abi Regus gave him land in Wales. Now, there was discussion, Ross and I talked about this, and this is one of the points that Alan Wilson made concerning the gravesite, which we thought was in the Blackfriar Abbey there in the backside of Cardiff Castle. At one time, there was another creek that ran this way that divided it. And Ross thought that creek may have created the island of Avalon, but I don't think so. I think Avalon is Anglesey.
Okay. The church you mentioned just a moment ago, I spoke to another author about this recently, and he said that particular church has no history prior to the Norman invasion around the 11th century. I don't know if you've come across any history that proves that the church is older than that at all.
Well, all I have is Ross's report, and Ross said that that Alan Wilson had said that this was a site as a pilgrimage for like 400 years. But the Blackfriar Abbey itself may not have been built until the Norman invasion.
Okay.
Yeah. And when you look at the Norman invasion, now I want to go back to this question you asked, because you asked a very good question. When you talk about the difference in the faith, the Arimathean protocols are completely different than the practices of James the Just and the practices of Peter. Okay, because Peter was instituting a form of communism. In fact, if you ever hear the passage, from each according to his need, to each according to his ability, those are quotations out of the book of Acts. It doesn't come from Karl Marx. It comes from the book of Acts, right? And this idea, okay, fine, it failed. It did not work for Peter. That's why he left Antioch and ended up living his life out in Babylon, which is now modern-day Cairo. But Arimathea, on the other hand, first of all, he was a Sabbath keeper. And he was a feast keeper. And he followed the calendar that would predict the feasts. Because there was no Constantine is not going to show up for 300 years. So the practice in the Isles when Arimathea arrived with the testimony of Mashiach was the common law based upon the Ten Commandments with, at that point, 600 years of practice, 600 years of application in the Breton system, 600 years developed alongside the geometry, alongside the botany, alongside the astronomy, alongside the music, alongside the triadic system, alongside the Breton system, all of this, 600 years of that. In comes the testimony of Mashiach, and it's brought by Arimathea, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, who was a Sabbath keeper, a feast keeper, and who knew the calendar. The difference is that because the common law was here, you see, Arimathea could not come in and say, hey, we got changes that we're bringing. Nope, that's not going to happen. It's either going to fit like a glove or it's going to get rejected. And it fit like a glove. It was a seamless attachment. And because it was a seamless attachment, we see, as Mashiach said, I did not come to overturn the Torah. I came to fulfill the Torah. Mm-hmm. That the testimony of Mashiach is the Ruach of prophecy. And all of those prophecies that were given are fulfilled in Mashiach. Sometimes we don't see it because sometimes they're very cryptic. But nonetheless, all those prophecies were fulfilled in Mashiach. And so the Druids recognized this. And so they accepted this. So the practice, when you see the practice of the church, was a Sabbath-keeping church, a feast-keeping church. And there's evidence of the calendar. They found a fragment. Well, it's better than a fragment. They actually found a brass shield in France that had only been busted in two places, and they could put the shield back together. It's called the Coligny fragment. And the Coligny calendar is set out on that fragment. And this was a calendar that was practiced by all of Europe that was influenced by the Druid system. All of Europe, influenced by the Druid system, practiced that calendar, which had an intercalary month. It was a solar lunar calendar, and its starting date was predicated upon the vernal equinox. So you can see, and you see evidence of the equinox in Nouth. And you see evidence of marking the winter solstice in all kinds of megaliths all over the British Isles.
Wow.
And this is not to give emphasis to the Star of Remphan kind of ideology, which would follow later on. But when Rome got word, when Rome came to know that this was taking place in the British Isles, we're not going to allow that. We've been trying to snuff out the Druids for some time because we're going to write the narrative. We're going to write the history. We're going to develop the science. And so they sent in that group of Romans in 58 AD to kill both Joseph Arimathea and all of the Druids they could find. And that happened in Bangor on the Straits of Menai.
Right. Did they kill JFA then? No?
He died a natural death. Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Pidgeon, we normally do about an hour on average, and we're approaching that mark already. This has been incredible. I've really enjoyed listening to your answers. I'll take a couple more questions from the chat room, but would you be able to join me again in the near future to carry on with this? Because
Paul, I would love to. Of course, I have a very warm spot in my heart for Wales and the brothers in Wales and the work that's being done in trying to pull out the history. And because it's just sad to me that the governing authorities in Wales just quash it. They just we don't care. Laid over it. Put up a parking lot. Put up a Tesco. We don't care what's here. And the truth of the history of Britain really is housed in those mountains in Wales.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah, totally agree. Well, that's the main kind of purpose of this live stream, is to keep this history alive, to preserve it and restore it, hopefully. So I'll just take a question here from James Stephen Emery, who was asked, was Constantine's mother, Helena, a Druid priestess?
Yeah, now this I do not know, but it would not surprise me. Constantine was born in York, and Helena is the one who traveled down and made all of the assignments in the Holy Land. But But by the time you get to her in the third and fourth century, the Druidism has been brutally assaulted by Rome, brutally assaulted, and the Brehon system is going to be abolished at the point of a sword, and the practices of the Druids are going to be burned at the stake. Now, there were some enclaves where people would hide, for instance, in the island of Iona in Scotland, where you get the printing of the Book of Kells, which is the first writing of the New Testament in British history that's been retained anyway. And that didn't happen until maybe the 8th century AD. But when you talk about that, I mean, the Druids are not going to write anything. And because they didn't write anything, the history is just gone. So if you can kill off all of those people who had that triadic memory, that had that training, then you can get rid of the Druid system. And Helena at this point is going to be 300 years after the fact. Now, I do want to make a point here, though. The practice in Wales, which of course wasn't called Wales at that time, but the churches that were in the Western Mountains in Britain were very, very dominant, and Sabbath keeping, feast keeping, calendar keeping group until Augustine arrives at the other end of the isle over in Canterbury. And Augustine arrives around 590 AD. And Queen Elizabeth I's letter to Rome concerning Augustine is scathing. You sent us a wolf. And Augustine would go after, in particular, he would go after the bishops in what is now Wales and excommunicate them and ultimately execute them because of a number of things. First, they refused the invocation of the saints. Second, they refused the transubstantiation doctrine, that the bread and the cup are in fact the flesh and blood of Mashiach. And third, they rejected the Catholic Mass. And because of those things, they were excommunicated and then ultimately executed. And Rome would begin its conquest from inside through Augustine. And this is going to be a war that's waged on up to Henry VIII. And Henry VIII, to the extent that he was able to assert sovereignty in the Isles against the papacy, still, and as many of the Puritans said, you did not go far enough. You did not restore us to the Arimathean faith. And, so for me, I mean, look, the Arimathean faith was, the practice was so important, because what was the difference between Arimathean and Jacob Sadiq? Thou shalt not steal. That's what the difference is. Because, and you see this with Abiragas giving him 12 hides of land. He was a titled landowner. Because he was a titled landowner, things were different. Now, one last thing I want to say too, because then we got to wrap. Oh, well, let me take some other questions if you've got any other questions.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so this is from James Stephen Emery. He's asked, Constantine would have investigated stories of Josephus and Jesus in England and written reports back to Rome. So would they still be in the Vatican archives?
Yeah, they probably are. If he did that, they probably are still in the Vatican archives. And those archives are accessible for people who want to do the study. You've got to go through the formalities and you have to be nice when you go there, right? Yeah. Well, here we go. Did young Jesus come to Britain? And the answer is, I think the answer is most assuredly yes. And I think he spent from age 12 until age 28 in Cornwall.
Age 12 to 28. Okay.
Yeah. Now he may have been
years.
Yeah. And in those years, guess what? He was in the Druidic system. He was dealing with, because he was amazing everybody when he went back to Jerusalem. How do you know these things? Where did you get that information? How do you know these things? And he was just flabbergasting them. They couldn't. And well, what did he do when he got there? Hey guys, you got that wrong. Nope, that isn't right. Nope, that one's wrong. You're loading burdens on people's shoulders. The scripture doesn't say that. And so he would try to correct them, but in the meantime, and this is one of the so important about the New Testament, he was performing miracles. He was raising from the dead. He was healing. And, there were things that were taking place that could not be denied. And in fact, there's, I think it might be in the article volume. There were, in addition to the 12 Talmudim coming forward and arguing the points of theology, there were 13 witnesses that came forward saying, he healed me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In front of the Sanhedrin after his death, right? And so, these are kinds of, these are important things. So now somebody said that the common law came through the Trojans, and I don't think that's true. And the reason I don't think it's true is because it has to do with the Ten Commandments and the common law, the derivatives of the common law. They come through the Torah itself. Moshe's Torah is all predicated upon the 10 commandments. Now, I'm not saying that the Torah, you shall not do this or you get stoned, or you shall not do that or you get stoned, right? But the Torah has precepts in it. And the precepts in the Torah include criminal law, civil law, contract law, marriage law, divorce law, inheritance law, of even how you handle freight and bailiffs and so on. All of that is contained in the Torah. The precepts are contained in the Torah, but all of them are derivative of the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, because of this, when you see how these are applied in the work. So if you're a judge, right? Say you're a Brehan, you're standing on the walking stone, and the guy comes to you and says, hey, this guy told me this horse was 12 years old, turned out to be 20 years old, and I paid him for a 12-year-old horse. What do you think? Well, the Brehan is going to say, well, 108 years ago, so on and so forth, found the very same thing. And he said, blah, 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 blah. But he used the model that was based on Moshe's Torah, which said that if you did that, you have to pay him double. You see? And this was the precedent established in the Torah of Moshe. Now, this is well established in the writing of Jean Baudin in his 6 essays on the Commonwealth that he wrote in the mid-1500s. And he makes a very good argument to establish that.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I think I best wrap it up there because we're over time. This has been absolutely fantastic, Dr. Pidgeon. I've got your information has spawned so many questions in my mind. I have to get you back on at some point in the near future to discuss more on this topic. It's been incredible. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry to everyone. We've had so many comments tonight and so many questions. I will make a log of them. And next time we have Dr. Pidgeon on, I will try and put some of them forward to him. Okay. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. It's been absolutely incredible. Please stay behind after I finish the show so we can maybe discuss a future date to yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I don't think I've forgotten anything. Okay, next week I will be flying solo, so I'll be doing about half an hour on my own, and it will be a summary of everything I've learned so far on early Christianity in Britain, which has gone up quite considerably since I've been speaking to Dr. Pidgeon. So that's something to look out for. And please don't forget that next week at 8 o'clock, Marcel Abrahams will be talking to the Amish Inquisition on a live stream, and she'll be discussing her book, The Great Migrations. Dr. Pidgeon, thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge with me today. It's been absolutely amazing. I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please give the video a like, do subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.